remember was these girls going crazy and the smell of piss. All these girls would faint instantly and they just piss. And all the dirt from your shoes would form tiny banks in the rivulets of pee. And that was the Beatles' experience.
Hello, and welcome to episode 296 of Something About the Beatles podcast. First thing you might be wondering is, why 296? Didn't we already hear 297 and 298 to close out 2024? Yes, you did. And this is 296. Taped in November, and we made certain choices as to the order of things. But anyway, it was marked 296, 296 it shall stay, and yes, it's coming after 298. The first one of 2025, a year which promises to be full of good stuff from the Beatles and from this podcast, and just events generally, one of which I will get to in a second. But first, my guest is Dr. Richard Mills, born in Ireland, grew up in England, an academic who has written extensively about the Beatles. The book he's got out currently, The Beatles and Fandom, is a terrific book, a Bloomsbury book. If you can get your hands on it, every once in a while they have great discounts on these things. And he's got another one coming out in May 2025, The Beatles and Black Music, which we touch on in passing, but we'll have him back on the show for that when the time comes. Meanwhile, January 21st had been announced sort of informally as the publication date for my collaboration with Jerry Hammack called Ribbons of Rust, Volume 1, The Beatles' Recording Career in Context. That has been deferred to a date in February, a very portentous date in Beatle history. If you know, you know. If you follow my work, you know. But in any event, if you follow the newsletter, which I would recommend you do, satb2010@gmail is how you sign up, subject line newsletter, and join the hundreds of people who already have done so and are very glad that they did. I think it's safe to say, because virtually every one to a man and woman has requested copies of every single one. So make of that what you will. But anyway, Richard Mills, it was great discussion. His book is terrific. And fandom, one of those things, one of those overlooked subjects in plain sight that we have been getting more and more study of, whether through fan clubs, such as Sarah Schmidt's book that came out a year or so ago. We'll be talking about that in an upcoming show. Fan magazines, Alison Bumstead, you know her from this show, and her book that came out recently, Teen Set, we did a book launch for that, but she'll be back discussing other aspects of fan magazine history and how it applies to the Beatles. So that is coming as well. Fandom itself, we've had different expressions of that on the show with the first generation fans I've interviewed. But this is a book that examines all kinds of aspects, including the Beatles' monthly fan magazine. He's a terrific guest. We have crossed paths a number of times without truly connecting till this show, so I am very happy for that. It will not be his last time on Something About the Beatles, I can guarantee you that, and I hope you will enjoy that conversation. Speaking of past guests and this podcast, Jack Petrozelli, Walter Everett, Cameron Grider from the RPM School. I've had them on the show a number of times. Independently, separately, collectively. I've been a guest at the RPM School when they have various semesters going on specific album projects. And anyway, one of the things they've got going is coming this year. As I said, something to look forward to this year. June 24th through June 27th. So the week before July 4th. It is in upstate New York. Not far from Bethel and Woodstock. And I think it's about 2.5 hours from New York City. In any event, the Magical Mystery Camp, which is 4 days of immersion in symposiums, presentations, lots and lots of music, and just a sort of informal gathering where you get absolute proximity to the guests, whether they're doing their thing or you just want to hang out. This is basically what it is. So plenty of people are into Beatles history and just want to learn more and hear it from people who know what's what. And then there are people that aspire to make music. Maybe some of them have taken the RPM school so far, where Beatle music is deconstructed and broken down, and the class that signed on for the part where they actually walk you through how to perform and record this stuff, you know what I'm talking about. But Magical Mystery Camp is an in-person 4-day event in upstate New York. The guests this year, first of all, Jack, you know from his band The Fab Four. They are, of course, Beatle tribute artists second to none, multi-instrumentalists, as well as in their stage presentation often augmented with live brass and strings and harp player and whatever else is needed to replicate the Beatles' studio recordings. So a terrific act. You've got that. But you've also got a number of musical guests as well. Steve Forbert, you may know him, remember him, late 70s, early 80s, his hit Romeo's Tune, as well as everything else he's done, which is considerable. He was a frequent guest on Richard Courtney's From Me to You radio show out of Nashville. Big Beatle guy. Joan Osborne, a frequent collaborator with Jack, who you know from her hit One of Us. And she's been on the road with all kinds of acts through the years, including the Grateful Dead in its various iterations. She's done the camp before, actually. And Peter Asher, everybody knows as one half of Peter and Gordon, as well as being the producer of Linda Ronstadt and James Taylor. He discovered James Taylor, produced his first album at Apple, as well as being the head of A&R at Apple, very tight with Paul through the years. And he's the host on Beatles channel Sirius XM, as well as author of the book Beatles A to Z. Those are your headlining guests, and you've got other luminaries there as well, including yours truly and Jerry Hammack, who will be presenting about our book. You have to go to the site magicalmysterycamp.com/something. That'll bring you to registration, but magicalmysterycamp.com for all the information and all the guests and the accommodations. So it's Catskills, right? So you have mountains, you got a lake, so there's swimming. You can hang out when you're not engaged in Beatle activities, and you've got arrangements ranging from a place to set up a tent to shared rooms and cabins. Depending on how you define camping, you can arrange it to your satisfaction, to your comfort level. But there's also, if you go to the site, if you need a little help from your friends, they do have scholarships as well, because this is a learning experience as well as a fun Beatle hangout as well. You can easily make it part of a road trip and then visit Bethel or Woodstock or New York City. So a beautiful location and the beautiful Beatle vibe going on, immersed in art and music and cool people. So definitely check out the site. And again, it is magicalmysterycamp.com. This is the week Tuesday, June 24th through the 27th, the week before July 4th. So it's a great way to kick off the summer travel season, vacation season, what have you. Any event, I'll be there. We'll be talking about it more. And in fact, I've got a video I made with Jack I'll be sharing shortly. But again, anybody wants to know, for example, why it's been 1 month since the last show, sign up to the SATB newsletter, satb2010@gmail.com, and you'll be informed on all kinds of stuff. I've not been doing a ton of social media lately, just to announce the new shows, and that's pretty much it. So anything else you really want to know connected with the show and Beatle World generally, that's the place to be. I send them out every Monday. So that's that. I was really looking forward to talking with Richard Mills, and he did not disappoint. It was a fun conversation. We talked about everything from Midas Man to Jane Asher to fans' views of Paul and a bit about Beatles Monthly, but lots to digest there. His book is, like I said, it's terrific, and I'm really looking forward to his next one. But apart from that, we got some great shows in the works. I promise will not be a month between shows going forward, barring any contingencies. And more on my own book with Jerry Hammack coming up. That will be, well, you'll find out stuff through the newsletter, everything there is to know. I'm sure we'll be doing all kinds of press and interviews and things about that. So, without wasting any further time, Richard Mills. Have you seen Midas Man?
Yes.
What'd you think?
Right. I was really fed up with biopics for a long time, and I didn't really enjoy them, especially, the rise and fall, rise again cliches that you see with Johnny Cash and you see with Ray Charles and all of those. But some are good, some are bad. I was a big fan of Todd Hidd's one on Bob Dylan. He did something very creative, with the idea, I'm not there,
Yeah.
he gets 500 people, including Kate Winslet. Not Kate Winslet, I'm very tired today. What's she called? Kate Blanchett. Gets 5 different people to play Dylan, and that was very interesting, very unusual, and it sort of that artistic, fragmented approach did service the subject very well because biopics are just so cliched. But having said that, as a pretty standard mainstream biopic goes, I thought Midas Man really wasn't too bad, and they did quite a good job of showing it from Brian Epstein's point of view.
Mm-hmm.
And you really got there's sort of a lot of empathy with the Brian Epstein character. I thought the guy that played Brian Epstein was very good as well, as were the four Beatles. One of the curios of it, and I realize people really always want everything to be the fidelity to the real to be super real when you watch something, and people always point out the little problems they find with it. But they shouldn't really do that because it's the warmth of it, it's the feeling of it, because it's obviously not reality. But the John Lennon character is the smallest.
That's interesting.
All of them are 5 feet 11 and a half or something, aren't they? And then Ringo's 5'7". It looks like John's 5'7". And a lot of people have noticed that. And I don't know if it's that relevant because the guy that plays John Lennon's very good, but every now and then, Ringo's towering above him, and you go, it's strange. But I haven't obviously done research into this, but there's all sorts of little YouTube channels about the heights of rock stars, believe it or not. And honestly, and most tend to exaggerate slightly.
Yeah, yeah, of course. And we know about the Beatle boots with the Cuban heels and all that stuff. They absolutely were about visual presentation. So
Yeah.
it's not important, but on the other hand, yeah, I do not take as gospel their stats as issue 2 fan magazines back in the 60s either.
Yeah. Have you seen Midas Man?
Not yet.
Uh,
I don't think it's gotten any U.S. distribution yet.
no, I watched it. No, I'm trying to think what I watched. No, it wasn't Netflix. It was Prime.
Oh,
And again, being such a sort of super fan, I can watch most stuff. I actually genuinely thought it was a fairly good standard. It was pretty zippy. It moved pretty quickly. The guy playing George Martin was good. The Brian Epstein character was excellent, and I rather enjoyed it. And I say this is someone who's quite resistant to, very cliche mainstream biopics. So I'll be very interested to hear what you think of it.
I'm afraid I've asked you here to tell you some bad news.
Oh.
I've been talking to the others, and we've made a decision. I'm afraid we're looking for a new drummer.
Funny guy, Brian. All right, boys. You can come out now. You're not serious, this is a joke, right?
It's nothing personal, Pete. We're just in a different phase now, and you heard what George Martin
Whoa,
said.
whoa. Brian, what are you saying? I'm the beat in the Beatles. I mean, it's my sound. They're all doing it now. Ringo.
They enjoyed playing with him when you were unwell.
I was sick, Brian. I was sick, not dead.
well, what's interesting to me is getting your take on it as somebody that obviously you live in this world, you're steeped in this stuff. At what level of detachment you must have to watch it and not just sit there and go, well, that's wrong. That's wrong.
I always find that very strange because I absolutely love Ian MacDonald's Revolution in the Head.
Uh-huh.
And some serious Beatle nerds go, he got that wrong or he did this wrong. Even McCartney's criticised it. But Ian MacDonald was at Cambridge University studying English in 1969. He ended up editor for the NME. He's a music obsessive. He's more or less the same generation as the Beatles. And what his sort of new journalism approach to writing, that very lyrical, doesn't matter if sometimes if you stray from the truth slightly, it really captures the warmth and the spirit of the Beatles, and that's very important because, you could even if you talk to people that were there, memories are fallible, this and that. So I don't know when people go, look, they got something wrong in a film. You go, but it's not the be all and end all, is it?
Well, that's an interesting thing. That is absolutely ripe for discussion because if you were to ask a historian, they would tell you, well, you can't just lay out there things that you have no proof of or that are hearsay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And we had this discussion on the show with Aaron Weber. Maybe you heard when we were talking about the Get Back film.
Oh, Yes, I thought her book, was it The Beatles and the Historians? Is that
Yes.
what it's called?
Hmm.
I thought that was a superb piece of scholarship.
A game changer.
Absolutely. Also, I did like, in a very sort of weird, iconoclastic way, Phoebe's podcast, what's it called, was very good about taking a deconstructing Mark Lewis and
Another kind of mind.
another kind of mind. Yeah, I thought that was interesting as well, which fits a little bit with what Aaron Weber was saying.
Uh-huh.
There's just so many gaps here, and people just make mistakes.
Yeah, there is that. But in the recent one we talked about Get Back, where there are out and out, certainly there's manipulation, which every filmmaker does.
Yeah.
But when you rewrite an event in history to present it a certain way, what do you make of that? Do you throw the whole baby out with the bathwater, or do you try to pick apart, well, this clearly did not happen as it's being depicted on the screen. We know this, yet there it is, and millions of Beatle fans are going to watch this and think this actually happened when in fact it didn't. So
Yeah.
that's when things become problematic, because inevitably you will see down the road books being published on the Beatles' Let It Be period, and then on January 10th, after George walked out, John, Paul, and Ringo got together in a group hug. So distraught were they at this turn of events. No, that's not what happened. But there it is. It's in Peter Jackson's film. So I know that we're generally, there's no way of saying this without sounding like an ass, but we're generally a little bit more discerning in our approach to Beatle history.
I think so. That's a good way of putting it because
I'm trying.
no, because if you look at something like Bob Dylan's "Don't Look Back,"
Uh-huh.
it's cinema verity. Dave Pennebaker's got a light camera following him around, so you go, "Oh, this is really close to the truth." Then, if you see the outtakes, he goes, "Bob, I'm going to ask you now about what it's like walking up Denmark Street and singing a really nice guitar in London." And he'll go, "Yeah, okay, let's do that." And then there'll be action. So I don't know what happened with Michael Lindsay Hogg. There must have been retakes, and then of course the way it was sexed up by Peter Jackson's absolutely gorgeous. So there's a lot of it's just so obvious. It's not what happened isn't been mediated through so many things. It's been mediated through Michael Lindsay Hogg, through Peter Jackson. We don't know exactly what went on in those rooms, so we're getting there's a kernel of truth there, but we're getting a version of truth.
A version of truth, exactly right. And that's, I think, what we were on about, me and Aaron in the talk, is that this is not the capital T truth. This is a version of truth.
Yeah.
It was a version of truth in 1969 when it went through Michael Lindsay Hogg's cameras, because you're seeing history through a keyhole. Don't mistake it for something more than that, because it isn't.
Absolutely. And of course, again, I've got a colleague who's a historian and knows all the fancy theory that historians know about revisionism and deconstructing history and all of those things. And sometimes some people can be a bit resistant to those overly intellectual arguments, but there's a bit of truth to the fact that we have to deconstruct what we see because there's a lot of revisionism going on. There's lots of we're seeing this history from a partial and biased point of view, I would contend.
Yeah. What fits the description of genuine Beatles, raw Beatles, unfiltered, unprocessed Beatles?
Yeah. Yeah. What a good point. Yeah.
Is it the Maureen Cleave interviews done for public consumption? And maybe
Well, exactly.
they're a little bit more unguarded there than they would be talking to
That's
the
very
New York
true.
Times or something, right?
But I don't think this is at all controversial. I don't think any of us have any idea what they were like just sitting around with their friends having a drink because as soon as you go on stage, you're performing.
Right, exactly.
I mean, the people that get close to you, maybe your partner and a few of your friends, because you're sitting around having drinks, watching the telly, and you can sort of let your guard down a bit.
Yeah. But that will be a version of you different from, say, the version of George that Patty Boyd knew versus the version Tom Petty knew, the version that Bob Dylan knew,
That's such a good point. Yeah. As Christine Feldman Barrett would probably say, the Patty Boyd version would be very interesting and would have a lot of truth to it, I think.
I think so. I had her on, luckily, this year.
You did, I know.
Yeah.
What was she like?
She was all the Patty Boyd you'd want her to be. She was great. She was fantastic. I dearly wanted to get her back again, but I was told by her handlers, because this was the run-up to that auction that she had, which was
Yeah.
fascinating.
Yeah.
So there was a window there, and she just turned 80. And I was told since, because it's like, hey, I want to talk about your book of pictures that just came out that I think just kind of slid out under the radar and nobody really gave it its due. And she's like, her position was, you know what? It's me time now. I've Beatled and 60'd enough now. I think I'm just going to take it easy. Thanks. I enjoyed the conversation, but I'm past that now. I don't want to do this anymore. That was the response I got. And fair enough. You've earned that. But boy, there's so much more I wanted to talk to her about.
You know, if you live in London or New York, you bump into celebs an awful lot. I bumped into Jane Asher about 3 months ago.
Oh, yeah? Did you know her?
No, I just bumped into her at the back. She was in a play, and my partner and I were walking past the theatre, and she was there by herself.
Oh, my God. So
Yeah, yeah.
how'd you
I mean,
react?
if you look at Instagram, you say, well, I thought this was amazing. So I went up and I said, Jen, I'm a big fan of your work, and can I take a photograph with you? And she went, yeah. So we chatted a bit, and for some reason, I had no interest asking her about Paul McCartney or the Beatles. We ended up discussing the movie Deep End, directed by Jerzy Skolimowski, the Polish film director. And she went, do you like that one? And I went, yeah. And I say, he's got a new film out. And she was going, oh yeah, I must go and see it. So we had a lovely chat because I'm genuinely like a lot of the films that she's been in.
Uh-huh.
And she's just seemed really nice.
That's amazing. That's great. And
Yeah.
I just wonder at what point it would have frosted over if you started like humming "I'm Looking Through You" or something.
Oh my gosh, that would be awful.
Yeah.
That would be awful. No, I was with my partner and I also were with a friend, and we we were with a friend called Elizabeth who is married to quite a famous rock star, and another friend joined us, and then Elizabeth went to the restroom, and we told our friend that she was married to this rock star, so she Googled the rock star, and then we forgot about it. When the friend came back, her phone came on and played the intro to one of his songs, and you should have seen the look of his partner. Oh my God. So it was a bit like humming I'm Looking Through You to Jane Asher. Fortunately, she saw the funny side of this.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh gosh.
It is kind of funny between Jane Asher, who, to her credit, she easily could have milked the 60s for what it was worth.
Yeah.
And maintained a dignified silence, which is great.
Yeah.
While her brother is basically a professional Beatle fan.
I like the way you put that. Peter Asher turns up at all the conventions.
Uh-huh.
I interviewed him once. He was very nice, but
Yeah, he's great. But
yeah, he is great. But you know, he's part of that. Just my personal theory is that Jane Asher, before she met Paul, had a nice little acting career, just ticking along, and she never gave in to any sort of ideas of Liverpool chauvinism, some vestiges of Liverpool chauvinism that might have existed in his mind in the early 60s. She didn't give in to that, and she carried on acting. And she's actually, if you IMDb her, she's got a very impressive CV of work. And maybe that's it, you know, because, you know, if you're really busy and you're wrapped up in your vacation, you probably won't just think the highlight of my life has been with Paul McCartney. You got other interests. So then when you're doing that and you're involved in something, it would be very irritating if people just tried to ask you about an ex-boyfriend. And everything we all read about her ex-boyfriend was that he hadn't quite settled down, shall we say, when he was with Jane.
right. Yeah. And I get that even for the Beatles having it thrown in their face, that the two living ones now being constantly compared or people wanting to hear about the stuff you did while you were in your 20s, as if the rest of the 5/8 of your life doesn't matter or something. But it's a very interesting thing. I am very respectful that she has not told her story, but good God, if she put out her memoir tomorrow,
Yeah,
I'd certainly be in line to buy it.
I would be so excited. My sharp elbows would be slightly in front of you in the queue. I mean, it would be really interesting, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it would be. It would be,
That's
because
such a
she's somebody who always came off as dignified and smart, and somebody whose insights would be valuable.
Yeah, and she's there from 63 to the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear her take on the Maharishi.
I would read a book that she wrote on her parents.
Yeah, oh yeah, I mean, and wasn't it her mother taught George Martin at the Guild
Yes.
of Music? Yeah. That's really interesting as well.
And her father was that clinical, I want to say psychologist. He was the one that came up with Munchausen syndrome. He was a very accomplished guy
Yeah.
who took his own life in 1969.
Oh, I'd forgotten about that's right. Yeah.
Yeah,
I think that just even bumping into her very briefly for a couple of minutes, I just got that feeling that she's obviously from a very sophisticated family. She's a very sophisticated metropolitan. And that all sort of, I think her behavior is because of that in a way. She's just well
sure.
educated, seems very nice. And obviously, even when she met Paul, she must have liked him. Obviously, he's super talented, super good looking, and all that stuff. But she would just go look. I don't think she would have been completely, in awe because she would have been used to meeting very articulate, interesting people. One would imagine.
Sure. People within the arts, absolutely. When she's
Yeah.
doing quarter mass experiment back when she's 5 years old or
Yeah,
something.
yeah. And there's a great film she's in with, I've forgotten it. There's one where she's in the south of France, 1961. I've forgotten the name of the film. I think it's
Uh-huh.
kind of Moore in it, and it's really, really good as well. And is it the Fall of the House of Usher? Is she in that?
Oh yeah, yeah. I think yeah, she's one of those Poe things. They're
Yeah, it's one
mask.
of those Poe things. I think it might be shortly before she's met Paul as well.
Right, right. Mask of the Red Death or something.
Yeah,
One
so
of those.
she's hanging out with Vincent. Yeah, it might be that way. That's the one it is, I think.
Okay.
So was it Roger Corman?
I think so. Yeah.
She's hanging out with Roger Corman and Vincent Price and all of these people.
Uh huh.
And God knows who popped into the house in Wimpole Street before she met Paul.
Oh God, yeah, absolutely. That would be a
Yeah,
fascinating story, just because it would inform our understanding of, because clearly what we know from a distance is the cultural education he got
yeah,
in the Asher House.
yeah.
We know the people he's talked about, that whole London Underground thing and Stockhausen and all this cultural immersion he was getting. It'd be fascinating to know exactly what was what and how it might have informed his artistry.
Yeah, I think so. I do think he was also a very curious person anyway, and
Sure.
lots of very diverse interests.
He vaguely resents anybody knowing something he doesn't know.
Yeah, I think so.
Right.
I mean, people tend to forget about the Beatles, especially John, Paul, and George were being streamlined into the middle class because they passed their scholarship and got to very, very good schools.
Hmm.
So they had this access to education. And Paul was certainly interested in a whole range of subjects, from bird watching to drawing, especially. He was a very capable artist as well.
Well, he's an essayist when he was young. He won that award
Yes.
for doing the thing about the Queen.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I read that somewhere.
Yeah, uh-huh.
I don't know where I found it. It's actually not bad, is it? 'Cause he's only about
Right.
10 or 11.
It's interesting.
It's actually quite well written for whatever age he is. Yeah, that's not bad at all.
Right, you're right. Bursting with creativity.
Yeah. Have you ever interviewed him or met him before?
I've met him. I got within 10 feet of him. It was an unsanctioned opportunity, and his bodyguard drove me off. I was trying to give him a copy of my revolver book, and
Oh,
yeah,
that's a
we locked eyes for a second, but he didn't know who the hell I was. I got a camera bag, which could easily have been something not so benign, and
yeah,
they got
yeah.
rid of me. So yeah, that's the closest I've come.
I've been about this far from him.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, I was on the, but well, it was completely unintentional. I was at the South Bank in London, if you know it, and there's the British Film Institute, which is just amazing. It's an archive keeping the history of British film and TV alive. It's absolutely wonderful. And they were showing Magical Mystery Tour,
Wow.
and I had a ticket for the 9 o'clock showing, and I was just waiting for a friend outside the South Bank. And it was on the river where cars aren't allowed to go up the stretch of the river. And suddenly this huge, big, massive Merc or some fancy chauffeur driven car turned up. And suddenly Paul McCartney got out, he was standing right beside me. And I realized they were showing the premiere 2 hours before they let the hoi polloi into the public.
Uh-huh.
And I wouldn't be starstruck particularly by anybody, but I was by him. And I just went, Paul, can I shake your hand? And he went, yes, but he turned around at this point and he turned around again and shook the hand of the guy standing beside me. And then I followed him with my hand out going, can I shake your hand? Can I shake your hand? By which time he'd walked into the party.
Wow.
But he seemed pleasant, to be honest with you. I mean, it must be weird to be that famous.
It seems that of the four of them, he was the one that was the most comfortable with the adulation, considering what they went through, that is beyond what most human beings must be capable of, to have every aspect of your life so scrutinized and
Must be awful.
not a moment's peace when you're in public.
Yeah, it must be awful. He did seem very comfortable with it. I think he's naturally gregarious. He's very extrovert. I mean, you know all those stories about him bringing his guitar in and singing at break time for all his friends at Liverpool.
Right.
That's just what he's like. He's Mr. Showbiz in a way.
Uh-huh.
I mean, he's a consummate artist, but he's also got that. He likes the showbiz stuff.
Yeah, he's an entertainer.
Yeah, I'm seeing on the 19th of December, actually.
Oh, wow.
I hope his voice is.
It's funny. I just saw a clip of him, I think from Mexico City, where St. Vincent and Jack White were with him for like the Abbey Road finale. They performed that with him on stage.
Oh, really?
Yeah, trading off the lead solos. And it was
Yeah.
quite impressive. I wish I was in that room. I wasn't watching it thinking, oh God, Paul, that voice. No, it wasn't like that.
Well, I was nervous before Glastonbury, and it was whatever happened, it was fantastic.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, yeah, I'm staying on the 19th of December at the O2, and my partner has never seen Paul McCartney.
Uh-huh.
So I hope he does a stormer just to get her freaked out, you know?
Sure, absolutely. I think you can be pretty confident in that.
He will, he will. Are we recording this, by the way?
Absolutely.
Oh, we are! Oh, I didn't
Yeah.
realize that. I didn't know we'd start. Oh, this is fun. Gosh, I don't.
Yeah, this is great.
Oh, right. I didn't think we'd started. At least I haven't said anything too silly yet.
Allison was spot on.
Oh no, I'm quite. I've certainly got a chatty gene. I don't. It's a very cultural thing. I'm from the north of Ireland, and we've all swallowed the Blarney Stone. I think is a good way of putting it. Yeah.
Well, didn't they identify as Irish, pretty much?
Yes. Robert, you'd be a fan of this as well. I really like that Nothing Is Real podcast
Mm-hmm.
with Jason Carty and Stephen Cockcroft. They take a really deep dive into the Beatles' Irishness.
Mm-hmm.
It's absolutely, it's there, it's real, it's an important field of research. I did a talk on it once at the Irish Cultural Centre in Hammersmith in London, and everybody loved it. I mean, absolutely. John Lennon's family come from County Down in the north. Obviously, Paul's father, Jim, was married to Mary Mohan, who
Mm-hmm.
was Irish. Very interesting. What they call in Ireland a mixed marriage. The McCartneys were a Protestant family, and the Mohans were a Catholic family, which is very interesting as well. George got Irish roots as well. You must have seen that photograph of George's mother, his elder brother, I think it's Peter and George, walking over O'Connell Bridge in Dublin in the late 50s.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah, yeah. And George is sort of just this little George in his little school uniform and his little shorts.
Uh-huh.
So, but the Irish connection is very, very strong with the Beatles. I think it was John Lennon's great grandfather. Anyway, the Lennons washed up in Liverpool in the 1840s, fleeing the famine in Ireland,
Mm-hmm.
and then they went and lived in obviously a squalid part of Liverpool. And the McCartneys weren't far behind. So, and they always joked that Liverpool was the capital of Ireland, which it really was, because I think 80 to 100,000 people washed up in fleeing Ireland in the 1840s in Liverpool. That was the first stop. A lot of the migrants who were fleeing poverty went to Liverpool and they went off to America.
Mm-hmm.
So Liverpool is and was a very Irish city.
It is interesting that this year, when the Mind Games set came out, and I talked about this with Glenn Greenberg, that was the first time people had seen that telegram, evidently from February of 72, that John was sending to Paul about doing some kind of Irish benefit.
Yes.
They'd both done their little Irish anthems, Give Ireland Back and Luck of the Irish and Sunday Bloody Sunday. So if there was a unifying thing to be had post-Beatles, Ireland was it. That was a pretty fabulous thing underscoring that point.
Yeah, there was someone who was very close to John and Paul at the time said that they met up in 72 at one point, I think in the wake of How Do You Sleep, to try to have some sort of detente between the two. And one of the issues they had a lot in common on was discussing the Ireland situation.
Right, which was heating up then. The Sunday Bloody Sunday was January of 72, and
I think it was the 30th of January 72. I'm actually
yeah,
quite old. I'm quite old now. I can remember it as a little kid. And that was the moment where things well, I mean, if pre-Troubles in Northern Ireland in the mid-60s, there was a weird sort of idea at one point that things were getting better. I mean,
mm-hmm.
the IRA had practically stopped existing in the late 50s, apart from a few people. By 1972, Sunday Bloody Sunday, all of this stuff. Within 6 months of that, there was tit-for-tat killings, and the Provisional IRA had started their campaign again, and the whole thing just suddenly accelerated. Whereas if you talk to the generation a bit older than that, there was a lot of idealism in the 60s that the sectarianism, this problem was something of the past. And I mean, as you know, something can tip those things off very, very quickly. And there was just a couple of, I mean, there's no design in history,
Hmm.
as you know, and a lot of that could have been avoided if there'd just been a little bit of vision on both sides. And Lennon and McCartney, I think, were acutely aware of this.
Sure. I'm reminded of that film a few years ago, the Kenneth Branagh film. Do you know which one I'm talking about?
Belfast,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, they left, and the Branaghs left when they were when Kenneth was 9. The first time I saw Kenneth Branagh in a play, it was a Graham Reed play called The Billy Trilogy, and he was playing a Belfast guy, and he was speaking in a Belfast accent. I didn't know who he was. The next time I saw him speak, he was in England. He was being heralded as the new Laurence Olivier, and he had a plummy Southern English accent. And I was going, that's a bit odd. Then I realised that he was born in Belfast, moved to England when he was 9, and at that age you would have been teased about your accent, so
Huh.
he very quickly lost it. I moved to England later, so I never lost my accent. You know when you go somewhere when you're young, you go somewhere, you pick up the language, you lose your accent. So Branagh could just, at the drop of a hat, he can go straight back into a very good, believable Belfast accent.
Yeah. I always found it very curious the speech pattern that Linda picked up once she married Paul.
Yeah.
Being this New Yorker, and then she picked up this weird sort of, not mid-Atlantic, but some lilt to it that is not quite native English, not England type
Yeah.
either. It's some weird sort of mishmash.
It's absolutely fascinating that because Scottish and Irish people are very prone if they spend a lot of time in America, me included, I think, at one point, because I spent a lot of time there, is that we can get a transatlantic accent very easily. And I ain't no linguist, but Irish and Americans do sound a little bit similar. And it's not surprising because the largest immigrant group in America in the 19th century was the Irish. And quite often in London, I've been mistaken for American, and I've had North Americans who've been mistaken for being Irish. So it's fascinating that. And then if Linda's starting to pick up a slight Liverpudlian accent,
Yeah.
there's that traffic is very, very interesting. I was friends with a professor of linguistics, and I kept trying to pin her down on the similarities between Irish and American accents, but she would always obfuscate and change the subject, so I don't think she knew why it was.
That's interesting.
But there's something there, absolutely there is.
Yeah.
I shouldn't really say this, but I've got a pet dog, and he's called Macca. And he was just here a second ago, but he's been discreetly moved out of the room, so you can get to meet him another time. I wonder where he got his name from, Robert.
Does he have 3 legs?
Well, that is the strangest thing. You know what? When he goes down steps, he goes down in 3 legs.
Okay. Well, he kind of named himself then, didn't he?
He must be. Maybe he's one of the Beatles entourage from the '60s reincarnated. That's what it is. I don't know.
He could have been Martha.
We're not been very serious so far, which really appeals to me greatly.
Awesome. Well,
Yeah.
in looking at your book, which is fantastic for the people who haven't seen it yet, The Beatles and Fandom, it's a Bloomsbury, yeah?
Bloomsbury, there you go.
Yeah, there you go. This is something that I said this when I was at the RPM school the other day, and I've said this elsewhere because it absolutely is true. We are like in this golden age of Beatles scholarship. I can remember starting out as a fan, you could practically count on one hand the number of Beatle books you had access to. And, some of them were rubbish. They were just quickie little fan things or picture books. But the serious stuff, we are simultaneously upping the bar in what we as fans are willing to accept. At the same time, more and more data is becoming available. So we've got actual evidence to work from rather than folk tales and hearsay and all that nonsense. So it's a really good place to be. And with this book, certainly, with the Christine Feldman Barrett book on women's history of the Beatles, and certainly Aaron's game-changing Beatles and Historians, all the stuff just coming out. The story is being fleshed out beyond the white man telling of the Beatles' history that has existed largely heretofore. We're getting other perspectives. I noticed you've got an upcoming book on the Beatles and black music, which I'm very much looking forward to. Ooh, look at that.
It's a lovely cover, isn't it?
It is. That's great. What a great
I
picture.
would say writing a book is such a difficult and painstaking and long process, but it's
Oh,
worth
yeah.
it when you look at the cover.
Hmm.
That's it. I've just finished the copy edits on the Beatles and black music, so it's going to be out in May 2025. So I'm
Great.
very excited about that.
Well, then, that's another conversation to have. But in any event, the point being that the fandom of the Beatles is something that I think is a component that until fairly recently had been under discussed, underexplored. Here you've got a whole book dedicated to it, and there's aspects of it in Christine's book, certainly in Allison's book on teen fan magazines. So all these great pieces of the puzzle are coming into focus, which is a really good thing as far as wanting to understand not just the Beatles, but the explosion, the cultural rock explosion of the 1960s and 70s. So there's room at the table for all these discussions to be had, and it's really quite satisfying to get fresh perspectives on this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I was lucky enough to see Alison speak at the PCA last April, and her presentation on all the magazines from the 1960s. It was absolutely amazing because they're lovely little micro histories of the period. We all feel that when you watch. I'm absolutely obsessed with watching films from the 60s and 70s and any sort of cultural artifacts from that period. I fetishize that period completely. You can just the clothes that people are wearing, the way they speak. I mean, you can intuit so much from a microtext in a way, just like Beatles Monthly or the fan magazines that Alison's looking at. They're wonderful little mini narratives and mini histories. They're a microcosm for so much else as well. I love all that stuff.
Yeah, contextualization is huge.
Yeah.
And the farther we're moved away from those times, I think the harder it is, or the bigger the challenge, getting people that are new to the discussion to understand the context within which this art was
Oh
produced,
yeah,
unless
absolutely.
you knew what they were absorbing at the time.
No, absolutely. I mean, any text opens up a cultural window on the historical period that produced it. There's absolutely no doubt about that. I mean, I do remember what you say is absolutely true. My mind was colonized with Beatles when I was about two or three because I was born in the 60s, but I don't really remember them. But my first memories are my elder brother walking around the house singing Ticket to Ride. So I was absolutely just almost predestined to love this stuff. And as you say, as a teenager in the late 70s, there really all the books were sort of vaguely cut and paste. There was the Beatles in their own words, which was a bit shallow. And it was probably the one that I do remember, which has been criticized a lot now, is maybe Philip Norman's Shout about 1981 was the first really serious big Beatles book, which of course it's been roundly criticised now because it was so Lennon-centric and it was so subjective and biased towards John Lennon. But as you rightly say, there was really nothing, and now it is a golden period. It's almost like the Goldilocks zone for academic books being published on the Beatles because we're far enough away from the sun to have perspective on it, but we're close enough to the sun to have the heat and warmth of it. So the Beatles phenomenon happened long enough ago to give it academic respectability, but it's close enough to have a little bit of sexiness, a little bit of liveliness. Because if I went and wrote a book on the Romantic poets, which would be great fun, and I looked at lyrical ballads, and I looked at, Shelley and all of those people, and Wordsworth and Byron and Coleridge, the point is I can't access electronically interviews with them. I can't, there's nobody alive who remembers them. Whereas this Beatles phenomenon is just close enough to the sun to have life, and it's just far enough to have academic respectability. So as the books that you mentioned, and you're kind enough to have mentioned mine, I think it really it's just the perfect window of opportunity to write about this stuff. Because when I told people I was going to write a book called Beatles and Fandom, they went, well, there's been so much ink expended on the Beatles. How could you possibly find something new? And I sort of went, au contraire, there's so much to be said about the Beatles. And every year there's more and more to be said. And also, the Beatles and black music, not many people really have dived into this. I mean, I did a public talk on the Beatles and black music recently, and lots of people came up to me afterwards and went, I did not know this. Even simple, even pretty straightforward information for all us Beatles nerds. The first Please Please Me and With the Beatles, the first two UK albums, were absolutely full of cover versions by the Cookies, the Shirelles, all of those African.
Barrett Strong,
Yeah, the
Marvelettes.
Marvelettes, who I love, Please Mr. Postman, and Barrett Strong, as you said. All of those people, of course, like Smokey Robinson,
Arthur Alexander.
yes, Arthur Alexander. They loved Larry Williams, which they've done in subsequent albums as
Yeah.
well. So when you tell this to people, they're a little bit freaked out by that. And then if you go to Liverpool and you walk up Slater Street, the Beatles were watching Lord Woodbine play Calypso there in 1957.
Right. Toxteth.
Yeah,
That
yeah,
that neighborhood. They're literally learning some of their craft by the local musicians there.
yeah, and of course, I mean, I don't want to talk about too much of the Beatles and black music, but it's so fascinating. Again, if we look at sort of micro histories or personal histories, Paul McCartney's father played Dixieland jazz.
Uh-huh.
He was in Jim Mack's jazz band.
Yes.
And obviously, his wonderful musical genes were transferred to his son, and he grew up in that environment. I know nature and nurture, genes or culture, but you've got both of that with Paul McCartney. But what I find really interesting about Britain's colonial history is that, as well as imbibing Dixieland jazz, Paul McCartney's father was a cotton salesman.
Mm-hmm.
And when you look at the colonial history of Liverpool, and one of Paul's uncles, I think, worked in a sugar refinery.
Oh.
And it's absolutely fascinating, that big history. Those grand narratives of history collide with the personal lives of the Beatles, and that makes it so fecund just to take a dive into that. And in 1861, I'm very, very at pains to say that in the 1860s, absolutely, most Liverpudlian people, most Manchester people were anti the slave trade, but the ship owners and the dock managers in Liverpool in 1861 were absolutely pro the slave trade. So already when I started researching this book, I did a bit of pre-Liverpool history because I wanted to look at the parents of the Beatles. I wanted to look at the colonial context. And if you listen to something like Walking in the Park with Eloise by Paul McCartney, which was his father's song, and he plays that, you hear this pretty straightforward Dixieland jazz tune that came out in 1975, I think, during the Venus and Mars sessions. But what you get there is that little 3-minute song is this beautiful, wonderful little tune that is a microtext, is a personal history that inherits all these grand narratives of history as well. It tells us about cotton salesmen, it tells us about the slave trade, it tells us about sugar, it tells us about Dixieland jazz. And it's just absolutely fascinating that, again, when you were talking to me in your introduction as well, it was absolutely fascinating. I'm of the generation that got into the Beatles in the 1970s, and I can remember studying history in school in the 1970s. When you did read a history book in the 1970s, it was all about politicians, it was all about economics. There was very, very rarely any mentions of the films or popular culture or what the food people were eating, all of that. And a history book now absolutely sprinkles mad fairy dust on it. The icing on the cake, the cherry on the cake is, if you read a book about 1960s history, you're going to find out that, for instance, the British Prime Minister in the 1960s was Harold Wilson, who was the head of the Labour Party. He always put across the fact that he was a man of the people. He had steak and kidney pudding, which was a working class dish. He always emphasised his closeness to Liverpool. He watched a soap opera called Coronation Street, which was working class people in Manchester in the north of England. And very famously, when the Beatles won their Variety Awards in February 1964, he gave them the awards and bantered with the Beatles.
This is a non-political occasion, so I'll stay non-political. Unless I'm tempted. So to keep out of politics, I just repeat to you what the Times musical correspondent said, referring to this music as distinctly indigenous in character, the most imaginative and inventive examples. And I'm sure the Times music correspondent spoke for all of us when he said of our friends the Beatles that harmonically it is one of their most intriguing with its chains of pandiatonic clusters.
Ladies and gentlemen, just like to say it's very nice indeed to get, especially to get one each, because we usually have a bit of trouble cutting them in 4. I would just like to say thank you very much. It's a great honour.
Thank you. Now pause.
Same goes for me. Thank you very much for giving us this Silver Heart. I still think you should have given one to good old Mr. Wilson.
Ringo. Anyone who knows us know I'm the one that never speaks, so I'd just like to say thanks a lot.
I'd just like to say the same as the others. Thanks for the Purple Hearts.
Silver!
Oh, yeah. Sorry about that, Harold. We'd like to sincerely thank you all, and we've got to go now because the fella on the film wants us, and he says it's costing him a fortune. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
And then in the 1964 general election, the Labour Party squeaked in with 5 or 6 seats. So maybe talking to the Beatles helped them. But the absolute point is that I don't think you could put me in Sue's corner or say I'm being pretentious about this. Beatles music, Beatles songs, Beatles personal lives, they're wonderful little personal histories that tell us so much more about the culture. Again, that was one of the reasons I wrote The Beatles and Fandom. One, nobody really looked at what the fans said about this cultural phenomenon, and they absolutely moved the phenomenon into areas, into places that the Beatles and the Beatles machinery, their managers, the record company could never have imagined which areas these were going to go into. So fans appropriated the meanings of the Beatles phenomenon and weaved them into the web and weft of their own lives with absolutely amazing results, mashing songs on YouTube, fan fiction, literary fiction, slash fiction, mashing their songs on YouTube. The Grey album where Danger Mouse mashes together the White album and Jay-Z's Black album to create a new hybrid form of art. So just this, everybody I think is completely got over the fact that we can look at pop culture and it tells us so much historically about what has happened. Absolutely, and it is a 60s thing. The blur, high culture and low culture, the binary between those two is completely broken down, is completely blurred. I mean, look at a Beatles song, it's got orchestration by George Martin, classically trained, an absolute genius. It's Tomorrow Never Knows, it's got experimental classical music, tape loops. Revolution Number 9 is really, actually, is Stockhausen, essentially. So everything that coalesces in a Beatles text is so rich for study. Sorry, you got me a bit excited there, Robert. I got you. You did. I feel like an evangelist ranting on there. But
Preach.
as you say, academia can be under threat sometimes and be seen as a little bit irrelevant, a bit pretentious. But it's not, because so much media work on the Beatles and so much of those books that you talked about, and the first publications of the Beatles, they were just very, very shallow cut and paste pieces of work. And there's a place for that, and I love that. But the Beatles are absolutely worthy of the deep study that's been afforded to them right at the moment.
Yes, and there's an appetite for it. It's not just important, but people want to know. They want to know every granular minutia detail that can be uncovered, because it gives them a greater understanding, greater pleasure out of immersing themselves in Beatles.
Yeah, I mean, didn't someone write? There is a publication, and its name escapes me at the moment, but someone wrote a book about. It was I think it was their father selling John Lennon a cheese sandwich or something like that. So it can be a bit risible at times, but you're 100% correct about that. And again, this phenomenon it seems to be the further away you get from it, the bigger it gets for some reason. Because I mean, you like me will have that strange feeling of meeting millennial Beatle fans, Gen Z Beatle fans. I mean, I was in a room of 21-year-old young woman the other day talking about the Beatles. I don't know, well, we weren't talking about the Beatles, we were just chatting about something else. And I said, what music do you all like? And the first person put her hand up and said, she was 21, my favourite song is Something by the Beatles.
Wow.
It's sort of odd, because you'd think that, well, again, one of the reasons for writing the Beatles and Fandom, I wanted to look into why this phenomenon still is strong, in a sense.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It absolutely is, and that it's so counterintuitive to what applies to other artists, really. But it's funny, you describe coming into fandom in the 70s. That's when I came into my fandom, and I do remember it was a bit of a lonely place because at that time there was nothing less cool than being a Beatles fan when everything else was Zeppelin, Rush, Kiss, whatever the million sellers of the day were. And it was like, oh, Beatles, they're broken up. What the hell? Why you into that, whatever pejorative they used.
Yeah, there was two waves of that. All the bands you mentioned, that's when I was about 10, 11.
Yeah.
Everybody, all the bands you mentioned, people said they're much cooler than the Beatles. And then in Britain and Ireland in the late 70s with the whole punk explosion, which I loved. I loved the Pistols and the Clash and all that stuff. So what would happen is I would hide all my Beatles vinyl behind my punk and new wave stuff. And it took ages to admit that I actually liked them because you got really ridiculed for liking the Beatles, and after a year or two of this, I went, no, sorry, I love the Beatles. I can like the Beatles, and I can like all this new stuff as well.
Yeah, like you, I could like both.
Yeah.
And I still have my first 4 Sex Pistols singles and Metal Box
I love Metal Box.
And Clash and all that stuff.
Those Jim, the covers of, if you've got those singles in pristine condition, the first
I do, yeah.
Singles, they're gorgeous. They're gorgeous pieces, aren't they?
Yep.
McCartney was a really big fan of Nevermind the Bollocks, Here's the Sex Pistols.
Boyle Crisis.
Yeah, he did. He said John Lydon has said that he was in the King's Road and Paul and Linda came past in the car and said, oh, it's Johnny Rotten, and they wanted to speak to him, and he got so panicked he ran off. Because he was like freaked out that Paul and Linda McCartney had recognized him and wanted to talk to him.
Yeah, it's such a weird little cultural dynamic thing. I'm sure you know the story of Steve Jones and Paul Cook running into Pete Townsend.
Yeah.
We love the Who. You can't break up.
Yeah, it's very true. But I mean, he's a very interesting and sophisticated guy. And he loves all sorts of music. I mean, he loved the Fugs in the 60s, all that proto-punk, CIA Man. I met Ed Saunders at a do up somewhere in New Jersey.
Monmouth,
Yeah, were you there?
I was.
Yeah, because I went up to Ed Saunders and said, McCartney loves you, and he went, I know. That was the coolest thing.
Yeah, that was great.
Oh, we must have crossed paths then, Robert.
We must have, absolutely, yeah. That's hilarious.
That was brilliant. That was the White Album conference.
Yes, it was. That was fantastic. Loved it. Yeah, that was. Yes, I had a band put together. We got to play in one of the music rooms doing White Album.
No.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, this is embarrassing. I probably saw you.
Probably.
Wasn't Lewison was there, of course.
Lewison was there. Well, that's where I met Allison.
Yes, I didn't meet us. I went to some hotel. I can't remember where it was. I went in a taxi with Alison Moran, BC the Beatles podcast.
Yeah.
Oh, what's her name? She's a friend of mine, and I've just blanked. Alison and she's going to hate me if she listens to this.
Oh, Erica White.
Yeah, Erica, who was lovely. Erica, Alison, and I went in a taxi with Mark to some hotel and sat up drinking, chatting very late, and Chris Thomas joined us.
Oh, that's one of the highlights of my life.
Yeah.
Yes. I taped a show with him there.
Yeah, and I was a bit beatled out by this stage, so I just talked, because he very famously produced Nevermind the Bollocks, Here's the Sex Pistols.
Oh, God, where do you start? 2 Badfinger albums, and Roxy Music, and Back to the Egg, and Procol Harum. Oh, my God.
Erica and Alison were chatting away to Lewis, and I was just talking to Chris Thomas about Nevermind the Bollocks. I was fascinated. And he was very good friends with John Lydon, actually.
Yeah, we talked about it because I couldn't help it, because loving that album, it's like, I got Chris Thomas cornered. I'm going to ask him about it.
Oh, what? I mean, amazing, because it's one of those albums, if you put it on, you listen to it the whole way through.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I've gone off on a tangent, but that's a good thing for a podcast, isn't it? I hope.
We're all about tangents here. Yeah. So I wanted to ask you about Beatles Book, because that's a sort of a resource that's been out there in plain sight that I feel has been sort of underutilized. But yours is the first serious discussion I've read about it, and the meaning that you can draw from it, which I thought was just fascinating, because you talk about its origins and the way the female fandom embraced it, and then it gets the reboot in the late 70s, and suddenly it's the males that are the audience for it because we're all train spotters and geeks about info and all that stuff. So it's a fascinating story. So why don't you give us some background on that?
Well, I love Beatles Monthly, and when I was a teenager in the late 70s, the magazine was rebooted, and I got completely obsessed with it and started collecting them. Alas, I think I've lost that collection now. So when I started writing the Beatles and Fandom, when you write a book, it's not, I've never had writer's block, but I had editor's block and I've had starting block. So it's very difficult to start. So I thought I'll try to do a sort of vague chronology of Beatles Fandom. So I thought the best place to start was Beatles Monthly in 1963 because it was always a very important forum for the fans. And so I went to the British Library and I ordered it all. I found all the Beatles monthlies and I read through them all. And the first thing that became apparent was the extent to which Beatles fans had appropriated the meaning of the Beatles into their own lives. And especially I thought this was very apparent on the letters page
Mm-hmm.
because the letters page was mostly written by, I'd be fair to say, a female demographic between the age of 10 and 16 years old. And these letters got very strident, very bossy, and very opinionated. And these letters would say things like, especially when the Beatles turned a bit hippie, oh, you're not as good looking with beards. George, will you shave your moustache off?
Yeah.
In the 63, 64, Paul goes on a holiday to Greece, and they're going, Paul, you look absolutely gorgeous with a suntan. It was all about the Beatles being relevant to the fans' lives. And here's where it's really weird. And it wasn't just, here's where I got the inspiration for this. There was absolutely a very erotic sexual subtext to these letters, very obviously,
Mm-hmm.
as there was Beatlemania. And a lot of them would be and there would be so many double entendres and euphemisms about sex in these letter pages. I love John when he's puffing on his organ, and maybe I shouldn't have said that in a podcast. But again, if you got a linguist to look at these letters, which I did, to look at some of these letters, you went, this is very, very strange because it's such an innocent, naive, very sanitized publication, Beatles Monthly, as it should be, because the Beatles are appealing to grandparents, parents, and young fans. So that was de rigueur for a fanzine of that nature. But the more you scraped away at the letters, you find this very weird sexual subtext, and then that links very strongly to the concerts.
Sometimes a cigar is not a cigar.
Sometimes a cigar's not a cigar, and at the concerts, the fans went completely crazy. And if you watch Shea Stadium, very quickly your eye moves away from the Beatles to look at what the fans are doing. And again, this demographic of 10 to 16-year-old girls were absolutely dominating the concerts. So in a way, it was very emancipating for them. In a way, the concerts were about the girl fans as opposed to the Beatles. And another inspiration on the Beatles monthly letters page and looking at those early concerts was a fabulous book written by Barbara Ehrenreich called Dancing in the Streets. And she absolutely wrote this feminist history of young girl Beatles fans. And she said that in 1950s American high schools, especially, the template of a handsome male was either an Elvis Presley, Tony Curtis, James Dean look haircut or a macho buzz cut. And all the male sort of heartthrobs were very macho and promulgated a very macho image. But by the time you got to the 60s, you suddenly had this androgynous, effete European look with these guys with long hair and suits, as if they'd arrived in a UFO from another planet.
Right.
So that was crazily attractive. Also, according to Barbara Ehrenreich, girls in the late 1950s, they were so repressed. They were just really been prepared to graduate high school, maybe go to college, I don't know, probably not, but get married and have kids and move into the suburbs. And even physical sports in school were prohibited for girls. They were usually cheerleaders. They weren't really physically getting involved in something. So putting my sort of pretentious pseudo head on, and Ehrenreich said that the whole lid came off with Beatles fandom. These young women were emancipated. They could scream. They could do ever they wanted, and they absolutely drowned the Beatles out with their screams. So it's a really very interesting seminal moment in history to have these fans. The agency that these fans had, they dominated the concerts. It's something that Barbara Ehrenreich has fleshed out in the Beatles. It's something that Christine Feldman Barrett has discussed as well. I heard an interview with Bob Geldof, who got into the Beatles dressing room in 1964, I think, when they played in Dublin. And he went into the dressing room. Him and his sister ended up talking to George and Paul. And their memories of the Dublin concerts in the early 1960s were, and this is most of the theatres that the shows happened in, there was urine
Right.
all over the seats and all over the concert halls. And that's people just got so excited. And I remember when I was a 14, 15-year-old boy, I wanted to be in the Beatles. When I got to writing the Beatles and Fandom as a older person, I'd rather have been with the fans screaming myself, quite honestly. It seems more fun than actually being in the Beatles. It sounds wonderful.
Well, it's an interesting take because for years the Screamers were written off as frivolous, silly, unimportant, not to be taken seriously.
Yeah, yeah.
But the girl fans apparently latched onto the concept of the Beatles giving them agency, giving them permission to get all this repression out of their systems in a socially appropriate setting.
Yeah, it's interesting with the interviews of the Beatles there as well. I mean, they seem very perceptive because John Lennon and Paul McCartney quite often in interviews, well, all four of the Beatles would say, look, this is just the female, I mean, it's very binary in those days, so excuse the language. This is just the female equivalent of when someone scores at a soccer match
Right.
and everybody screams and goes crazy. And I thought that was a very salient point because, I noticed this, and I'm friends with Mark Duffett, who wrote a book called Understanding Fandom. If you write about music fandom, somehow you don't get literary prizes, don't go to those people. People are slightly poo-poo. You're slightly down the pecking order and hierarchy of cultural and philosophical and academic interests. And it's very, very strange writing about fandom. But if you wrote about sport, it's completely acceptable.
Right.
I mean, it's acceptable for, you get all these guys in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, drinking beer,
Dressing up.
dressing up in whatever, their Manchester United shirts or their Chicago Bears shirts, sitting there totally neglecting their families, watching these matches, collecting all the football shirts, all the pictures, and having podcasts about sport, watching sport 24/7. But honestly, there's nothing wrong with it. I love it. I mean, everybody's a fan of something. You've got to be obsessed with something. But,
The tribal right.
yeah, absolutely. But being a sports fan is completely acceptable, and it is dying away a bit, but there's still some vestiges if you're into pop music or you're into music, and you're somehow a little bit lesser. You still somehow haven't quite reached the level of maturity that those sports fans have reached for some reason. So it is very interesting, that, isn't it? Because
Yeah, it sure is.
I mean, I think probably Christine brings this out as well. The really sort of perceptive people in the early 1960s about the Beatles were the fans. They cottoned on to the Beatles and how these songs were good, how this image was great, how this cultural phenomenon did have legs and would resonate for an awful long time. They latched on before the intellectuals did.
Right.
And before the adults did, I think. Didn't take the intellectuals and the adults long, but the initial impetus for loving the Beatles and taking them really seriously was the young demographic, I think.
Do you see a difference in this explosion of fandom and the way it was received and the way the fans ran with it? Is there a precedent for this? Because we lived through the Elvis mania before that and Sinatra before that, the Bobby Soxer thing. What made this different, or is it just an amplification of what came before?
That's an absolutely brilliant question because it was one of the reasons that I wrote this book. Because, like everybody, you sort of, the amateur sociologist goes, I wonder why this happened. And I like the way you use the word amplified because that's exactly what it is. Now, I think the Beatles became bigger and were bigger for numerous reasons, and probably one of the main ones is technology. Because the UK got on the national grid, I think it was in 1933. There was a consumer boom in the 1950s. So by the time the Beatles come along, there's going to be something that's going to be that big. There's the first satellite broadcast in 1967. So I think the Beatles' cultural phenomenon is based on a couple of things. But one of the things it's predicated on is technology, which disseminates their music and their image everywhere through television, through record players, through the consumer boom where people can go and buy records, they can buy record players. So the music is ubiquitous. It's everywhere by the early 1960s. That's why the Sinatra thing is wonderful. I'm a fan of Sinatra. The Elvis thing is wonderful, but there was something big was going to happen in the early 1960s because of all this, which we would now call cultural theory. That electricity was there was a consumer boom, there was a lot of big history again coalescing with the personal lives of the Beatles to make them famous. I mean, the Beatles also acknowledged this themselves as well. If John Lennon had been born a couple of months earlier, and all the Beatles, in fact, they wouldn't have been playing the Ed Sullivan Show on the 9th of February 1964. They would have been conscripted into the British Army,
Right, right.
which is really interesting as well. Also, the Conservative Party in 1944 ushered in the Butler Education Act, which meant that if you were a bright young person, if you passed one little exam, you would get a scholarship to a very, very brilliant school that would give you access to classical education. And people tend to forget that John, Paul, and George passed this exam and got access to this education. So Paul would have been studying the Romantic poets, and John would have been studying the Romantic poets on their 16-year-old O-level syllabus as well. So there's all this big history came together to produce the Beatles. I mean, and even, it might sound a little bit tenuous, but the Clement Attlee Labour government just straight after the Second World War, who were amazing, and Nye Bevan, this brilliant Welsh politician, they ushered in the National Health Service in 1948, which was codified in 1949. So the Beatles are living longer, they're healthier, they've got access to public libraries, they've got a bit of money in their pocket, they've got this whole cultural milieu that's going to sort of result in them being successful. So, I mean, and this was, again, one of the reasons I get into the Beatles. Also, it is fascinating as well that the Beatles absolutely was folk music. It was folk music, it was the people's music. And as you know, classical music was fantastic in the 50s and 60s, but it was becoming very experimental. And so what you got is that folk, meaning people, a synonym for people just got, your average person, we would just get a bit tired of the music. They couldn't really relate to experimental classical music. So these folk tunes came along and people absolutely loved them. So that's another reason for their success. So I would say that the Beatles' music will resonate for hundreds of years. And what adds a little bit of magic and a little bit of fairy dust to the Beatles music is that the fans keep nudging the Beatles phenomenon on every year, whether it was the death of John Lennon and people started conventions because they loved John Lennon so much, whether it was Britpop in the early 1990s, whether it was the one album going to number one in 2000, whether it was through Electricity Now and Then being a number one UK single in 2023. All of these things, the fandom does nudge this phenomenon forward. And it's a fascinating field of inquiry, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. What you just made me think of is, yes, the electronics, the ubiquity of media, satellite broadcasts around the world, live happenings, as our world did in 67. That was all great for making them this global phenomenon in the 60s. And then you've got the end of the Beatles, the 70s, a little bit of a fallow period while they're establishing their solo identities and their solo careers to up and down returns. But 80, as you say, John Lennon gets killed. You get this next wave going into the 80s of fandom and discovery. And then you've got the Beatles anthology in 1995 arriving virtually simultaneously with the internet becoming a thing, and suddenly the Beatles aren't this historic thing. There's new product, and you can summon them up by heading over to YouTube, and you can access video and live presentation of them from a generation before. So of course, kids that are living their lives on screens these days, of course they can access all that stuff as if they were contemporary artists. And so it snowballs further. And I have every confidence that there are new Beatle fans being born every single day.
Oh, that's such a what you said. I forgot to mention anthology. That's so important. Maybe a '70s fan got into the Beatles because of the Red and Blue album,
Right.
but millennial,
As was I.
yeah, as was I. And Ken Womack told me that was the reason he got into them as well. But you think about the anthology that influenced so many people of that who were, I don't know, 10 years old, 12 years old in 1995. That was the first time they encountered the Beatles.
It was an event.
I absolutely loved them. And what you said about technology is absolutely amazing. Now you can just summon up stuff at the click of a finger. And also, another reason the Beatles, I think, are so successful is that they did enter the national mythology of England, the national mythology of the United Kingdom. So much so that, I mean, if you go to Liverpool, there's the National Trust tours of John and Paul's houses, there's the museums, there's Matthew Street, there's the shops, there's all of this stuff. And of course, Abbey Road. In the Beatles and Fandom, I went up to Abbey Road and handed out a questionnaire to people I met up there. And when I met, quite often I would meet tourists from, say, North America, and they would have gone to three places. They would have gone to Buckingham Palace, Shakespeare's Globe, and Abbey Road. And quite often I met a lot of people that got on a taxi from the airport and went straight to Abbey Road. And then, of course, what you're saying, that's so perceptive about technology. What do people do when they're in Abbey Road? One, Abbey Road is a physical place and we can physically anchor our fandom in that place. But of course, the first thing you do now in 2024, at least for the last 15 years, is that this physical space immediately becomes digitized. It gets uploaded to the everywhere, to cyberspace, and people comment on it. People just engage with it, and already this physical space is just eddying and morphing into something really strange that is constantly changing, and it's just this is going to go on and on and on. And again, I'm all for AI. I'm all for embracing this stuff because, as you've hinted at, Beatles fandom is just going to go off in a myriad of directions that we can't even conceive of. I mean, if we had said to Brian Epstein, George Mark, John Paul, George and Ringo, the Beatles Brains Trust back in 1963, that there'd be this thing called YouTube about the Beatles, there'd be slash fiction about the Beatles, that there'd be statues of John Lennon in Cuba. If we mentioned all this stuff, they would have thought we were completely off our gourds, to use a sort of vaguely 60s phrase. But it is true. I mean, honestly, you can tell I'm getting very animated and excited again. It's this huge, big, untamed beast stalking cyberspace, isn't it?
Yeah. It's bottomless. It is absolutely bottomless.
That's a better way to put it. Sorry.
Wow.
I hope I didn't sound too excited and hope I wasn't too pretentious. I hope that was okay.
No. Because one of the things that anytime I see a Bloomsbury book that gives me pause is like, I'm so not an academic. I hope I'm going to be able to grasp
No,
this.
but honestly, the thing is, I taught a module in cultural theory on literary theory when I first came to the university, and a lot of it can be very pretentious, but at its best, it actually gives you a vocabulary to talk about, a vocabulary and a discourse to talk about stuff that you don't know. But I've never met anybody in the arts that can't intuit what all these literary theorists are talking about. And may have used a few big words in our discussion, but I think everything I said was dead normal and dead down to earth that everybody can understand and everybody.
Well, exactly. And that's what I'm saying to you is that you effectively presented it to the listeners beautifully.
Oh,
Thank you.
That's so kind of you. Thank you.
Yeah, no. It's perfect because I know for a fact from the years of doing this show that if I get somebody with a PhD after their name on the show, there is a certain segment that they call this highfalutin above me kind of thing. But no, I've been very, very lucky, first of all, to have access to so many PhD people, but second, that they seem to understand how to communicate. When you talk to them like a normal person, you get normal person conversation, so that's great.
I hope so, because that's
I have to say, I've met the best friends through the Beatles, and that is more Beatle
yeah.
magic. All over the world, people that I would give my arm to because you get each other, you share this deepness of empathy and feeling, and that's your tribe.
Oh, yeah, it's certainly my tribe. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got just talking to you now, you've really got my mind racing. I'm thinking about so much stuff.
Yeah.
I think I did bring that out in the conventions chapter of my book that studies always show that we're much happier as part of a community.
Hmm.
And we're always much happier with people. And as we get atomized and isolated, people get really depressed. When you're in a community, you feel so much better. There was someone I can't remember. I went to some Beatle Fest in Chicago once.
Yeah.
You know that one? And I met one guy, I forgot, it'll come back to me after I was finished speaking. And he was just so lovely. And it was the last day of the conference, and we were having breakfast. And he went, I'm going to be depressed for a couple of days after this.
Right.
We were all in this big, massive, gorgeous hotel, and everybody was a Beatles fan.
Yeah. Yeah.
There was no, and all the celebs in inverted commas were just as much into it as we were.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's definitely one of those things that is like Christmas for so many fans. I mean, truly, because you're meeting the family you've got scattered all over the country or the world once a year in that lovely environment. It is a safe place. It is love and peace. It's all that sort of goodwill vibe that you wish the world had the other 364 days. But it's wonderful.
That's a really interesting point that you made. There's an English journalist called David Hepworth who's very famous. He's published lots and lots of books. He says it's very unfashionable, but the thing about the Beatles was that their music made you feel good.
It was inviting.
Yeah.
Paul's especially. Come be part of Sergeant Pepper's band.
Oh my goodness. And you know that you said you haven't interviewed Paul. I live in London. We've got to get hold of McCartney again at some point if possible. It'd be lovely you'd be great with him.
Oh,
Paul's my favorite artist. He's second to none.
this is a man who his very existence has given so much joy to so many people for so long. It's like, how can you do any better than that? You don't have to like every song he
Yeah.
did or every album he's put
Yeah.
out. It's just, he's so giving.
Yeah.
He projects everything he'd want from somebody in his position.
Robert, as you know, the media is so shallow. So, everybody just goes, they get this really fixed idea about people. Like, Bowie's a genius from 71 to 1983, then it's Pants, and maybe his last album has got lots of critical great reviews, but a lot of his 90s stuff and early 90s stuff is amazing. And McCartney's doing songs like Mr. Bellamy. He's doing amazing pieces of work. I mean, McCartney 3's fantastic.
It's very interesting because I was watching the reaction to people when it came out, and maybe it's symptomatic of the world we're living in. I do daily posts, and I did something about Driving Rain the other day, and it was so visceral back and forth about this is the greatest thing ever, so underrated, versus this is why Paul McCartney should never be allowed to put out albums again. It's like,
Yeah.
wow, we can't even find a safe meeting place about a guy that ostensibly we're fans of, and that's why we're on this page. It's like, jeez, it's exhausting.
Well, I mean, I can be quite good at promulgating the old cliche, and it's very true that a prophet doesn't have honor in his own country.
Sure.
And the way let's say British instead of English, the way the British media have treated Paul McCartney is an absolute disgrace.
Yeah. Philip Norman, starting with him.
Unfortunately, Philip Norman writes very beautifully because he was a novelist first. He was in the Granted Book of Young British Novelists and all that. So yeah, he does take. Yeah. There's a lot of it is fictional. But Paul McCartney, I could be wrong, and I know that 50 states, very heterogeneous and all that. I got the feeling that North America was a little bit kinder to Paul than maybe Britain was.
I think historically that's been the case just because the grass is always greener. It seems like a Brit gets more automatically an American thinks when he hears a Brit speak, oh, they're clearly highly intelligent.
Yeah, but also, Robert, I think in the last 5 or 6 years, he's just been so ballsy and kept going that I think most people really, really respect him now. He's now fashionable and loved everywhere almost.
Mm-hmm.
And he's just stared that one down. He's stared it out. But even 10 years ago, I used to go to my local pub, and there was a really lovely woman there who worked behind the bar, and she said, "Oh, I hate Paul McCartney. I really hate him." And then I'd go, and she said, "But I do like the old Beatles songs." I said, "What Beatles songs do you like?" "Oh, I hate Paul McCartney." "What Beatles songs do you like?" "Oh, I think Penny Lane's really good, and I like Let It Be." And she had listed about 7 or 8 Paul McCartney songs. You go, "That was Paul. They're all by Paul McCartney." "Oh yeah, yeah, I suppose." I thought John sang that one. No, Paul.
He'll get to you whether you want it or not.
I understand you're 90 miles from home. Are the Beatles really worth all this trouble?
Oh, they're really worth it. I'd go a million miles. I'd go anywhere to see them.
How long have you been standing here?
Well, I don't know. We came down to Pittsburgh about 10, something like that, you know. But we got here, you know, in Pittsburgh yesterday afternoon about 4. We were just starting to come down here, but we weren't allowed, but we came anyhow.
Don't your parents object to you spending your time this way?
Well, my parents don't exactly like the Beatles, but they know that, well, we like them, and we just have to go.
How do you describe the feeling you get when they sing?
You die.
It drives you crazy, and you don't know what to do. You just get all excited all over. Did your parents have any objections to your coming here, perhaps because of maybe being hurt?
Well, she thought I might get hurt, but all she objected to was me skipping school, you know, getting out of school. She didn't like that too well.
Something About the Beatles. Created and hosted by Robert Rodriguez. Executive producer Rick Way. Title song performed by the Corgis. Something About the Beatles is an evergreen podcast.
Well, it seems to me that after your show, your real problems really begin. What's it like with these fans outside, Paul?
At first, it's murder, because, you know, it looks as though they're going to tear you apart. Once you get the hang of it, you get used to it, and I think it gets a bit easier.
Have you ever been in physical danger from your fans?
Well, occasionally, yes. Only when there's been a big mob, you know, a really big one. But usually they're quite nice if there's only a few at a time when you meet them.
Yeah. What is it? Do you deliberately try and create these sort of screaming reactions?
No, we just, you know, arrive at the theatre and they're always there waiting. And whenever we're doing a show, the police always come and say, "Don't look out the window," you know, because you excite them.
I'm dying to look out.